personally speaking, one of my favorite arguments to have is talking about all-time NBA point guards, because when it comes to point guards, so many of them are similar in so many ways. It's just one or two minor things that kind of put one above the other, and that's what makes it, and that's the beauty of it all. When you're arguing point guards with people, the top names you'll usually see, Magic Johnson is typically the consensus number one all-time point guard. Steve Nash, Isaiah Thomas. Some people will say Oscar Robertson, Jason Kidd, even Steph Curry, if you're into that, the whole three-point thing. But a name that I see a lot of people kind of discredit on this list is former Utah Jazz point guard John Stockton. And the point guard position is really predicated and based on dishing out the basketball, running the offense, and getting your teammates involved. And with that said, John Stockton is the all-time leader in both assists and steals, which are two of the number one things that make a point guard a point guard. And it's not just that John Stockton leads it's not just that John Stockton is the all-time leader in assists. He has it by a record margin. In terms of NBA records, John Stockton is probably the Wayne Gretzky of these records, simply speaking of the fact it's going to be a really long time before anyone even comes close to touching his all-time records. Now, how can someone with so many assists be so discredited and often not even be in people's top 5 in terms of true point guards in NBA history? As a matter of fact, lately, on social media platforms and even YouTube, I've seen a lot of videos and posts that refer to John Stockton as the most overrated player in NBA history. And the reason they say this is because they like to attribute most of Stockton's assists to the fact that he played with another all-time great, being former Jazz forward Karl Malone. And a lot of people say that without Malone, Stockton was nothing. And the reason they put guys like Magic Johnson and Isaiah Thomas over John Stockton is, the one argument you'll always see is, well, Stockton played with Malone. And the reason this kind of breaks the argument is the fact that Karl Malone is the second all-time leading scorer in NBA history. Only Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has scored more points than him. And it just baffles me that people can think someone's success relies so heavily on another player. One of the things I don't like about sports as a whole is the fact that we as fans like to try our best to discredit greatness. And this doesn't just go for the NBA, this really goes for sports as a whole. If you talk to any non-Patriots fan, they'll tell you, Tom Brady, he was only productive because of Bill Belichick. Well, if it was Bill Belichick's system, then how come that exact same system went 5-11 in 2000 with Drew Bledsoe at quarterback? It's just we often try to make excuses for why greatness is greatness. Another example is that group of NBA fans who like to say that his legacy would have been ruined if not for Ray Allen's corner 3 in Game 6 of the 2013 Finals against the Spurs. Well, what people like to ignore is the fact that LeBron James had scored 16 fourth-quarter points leading up to that shot. Without LeBron, they're not even in the game. But we like to say LeBron's legacy would have been tarnished if not for Ray Allen. And it's really the only thing about sports I find annoying. And then, obviously, we circle back to John Stockton. We like to make it seem like he's only a great point guard because he had the benefit of playing with Karl Malone. So if you're one of those people, the question I'd ask you is, if you replace John Stockton with any other point guard in NBA history, do you get the same results? And by that, I mean, if you replace John Stockton with Eric Snow on those Jazz teams, is Eric Snow the all-time leader in assists? He simply wouldn't be. He wouldn't even sniff John Stockton's assist totals. And let's just take Karl Malone out of the picture as a whole. John Stockton, without Karl Malone, would still be the NBA's all-time leader in steals. And, take assists out of the picture. John Stockton, at his peak, was a 17-point-per-game scorer on extremely efficient numbers, especially for the era he played in. In an era where three-point shooting was looked over, and really the only guys shooting threes were bench players and maybe like Michael Jordan, John Stockton was a 40% three-point shooter and finished his career as a 38% three-point shooter, despite playing in a very physical era where threes were not really considered a viable option for winning. Like I said, you take Malone out of the equation. He was still an Iron Man in terms of games played. In 19 total seasons played, Stockton played all 82 games 16 times. I call that pretty impressive. And then, without Malone, John Stockton is still an extremely efficient shooter and scorer who actually had a really good clutch gene that people like to overlook. And my examples for this is the 1997 Western Conference Finals. The Jazz are matched up against the Houston Rockets, who just 2 seasons ago won back-to-back championships and were a great team in the Western Conference. Game 6, series on the line, John Stockton catches an inbound pass and drills a dagger 3 to send the Jazz to the finals. And then we fast forward to the 1998 season. Jazz are in the finals. It's Game 6 against the Bulls. And a lot of people remember the shot that Michael Jordan hit over Byron Russell. It was his last shot as a Bull. It ultimately won Chicago their 6th championship. So obviously we have reasons to call that one of the most famous, if not the most famous shot of all time. But people forget what happened just seconds before that shot. And what happened was Karl Malone catches the ball in the post. John Stockton cuts to the right wing. Malone hits him across the court, and John Stockton drills what could have and likely should have been the game-winning 3 to force Game 7. So in just a 2-year span, I can think of 2 instances where John Stockton hit an extremely clutch shot to either get his team to a championship or extremely heighten his team's chances of winning a championship, which in my opinion, obviously, I believe Michael Jordan pushed off on Byron Russell. Jazz should have won Game 6. I'm not saying that Utah wins Game 7, but I'm saying there should have been a Game 7. John Stockton's prime was some of the most pure dominance we've ever seen. In the 1989 to 90 season, he averaged 17 points, 15 assists, 3 steals on 50% shooting and 40% from 3. Those numbers are unheard of. And if we really can attribute all of John Stockton's success to the mere fact he played with Karl Malone, then how come the other point guards who played with all-time great players, or even, to get more specific, all-time great big men, how come their assist numbers never even sniffed John Stockton's? Penny Hardaway, who played with the Orlando Magic and Shaquille O'Neal for a few seasons, at his absolute peak, Hardaway averaged just 7 assists, playing with Shaquille O'Neal, who is often referred to as the most dominant big man of all time. Those 7 assists are less than half of what John Stockton averaged during his best season. And that was playing with Shaquille O'Neal. You look at the Miami Heat Big 3. Why is it that at his absolute peak, Mario Chalmers only averaged 5 assists? And that was playing with Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, guys like Ray Allen, LeBron James, Mike Miller. How come his best was only 5 assists per game? It's just, what Stockton did was simply incredible. He is no doubt, in my opinion, the second best point guard of all time, behind only Magic Johnson. The reason I put Magic in front of him is because I think they're pretty close in terms of accolades, but unfortunately for Stockton, Magic has the rings that Stockton doesn't, and that's really what sets them aside in terms of greatness, in my opinion. But it just bothers me going through social media and even YouTube videos. I feel like every time I log on to this site, there's just something along the lines of, oh, why John Stockton is the most overrated player ever, by some YouTube commentary channel who just like to discredit everything John Stockton ever did in his career. I'm not even exaggerating when I say, I'm filming this on a Wednesday. Tuesday night, when I was looking up details for this show, I saw 2 videos in my recommended saying why John Stockton is extremely overrated. I obviously didn't click on them because obviously I'm not going to give that person a view. And they always have the same things where it's, oh, he played with Karl Malone. Guess what? Plenty of people played with Shaquille O'Neal. Plenty of people played with Kevin Garnett. People played with Dirk Nowitzki. People played with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And out of all of those players I just named, all of which are all-time great bigs, the only one who ever even came close to Stockton's numbers was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's point guard. And that's just because it was Magic Johnson, who was literally the only point guard who was ever better than Magic Johnson. Now, if you're one of those people who likes to watch those videos, claiming Stockton's overrated, and if you get easily convinced, then I highly recommend you do some of your own research, and you'll see that he was an extremely efficient scorer. He was an Iron Man who was always on the court. You could always depend on him. He was clutch when it mattered most. People really overlook him in terms of all-time great clutch players. And my closing statement, really, if you take John Stockton off the Utah Jazz, and he and Karl Malone never played together, I highly doubt that Karl Malone would be second all-time in points scored in NBA history. Now you flip it, take Karl Malone off the Utah Jazz, and he and Stockton never play together, John Stockton would still be the all-time leader in assists. You just separate the two from each other. They were obviously an all-time great duo. Without Malone, Stockton is still an extremely tenacious steals leader and overall defender. Take Stockton away from Malone, maybe Malone isn't the same prolific scorer we know him as today. It's just a shame that so many people would discredit him simply because of who he played around. And overall, I'm just not a fan of trying to discredit greatness and make excuses for it.